So I was thinking the other day, what is the most boring thing that I am the least interested in? And I thought to myself, documentation. Let's get a hold of Gregg. Let's talk on the podcast about documentation. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny? I have a funny story about that
Yeah.
too. So
I'd love to hear it.
So years ago, I'm talking like when would this have been? Maybe late 90s,
Yeah.
early 2000s. I'd started getting into this back in the as far back as the 90s. And I had researched this very awful subject. And and it took me about 3 years, and my conclusions, when I looked at my notes, it appeared to me, I'm like, oh, that's what we've got to do. So I started doing things a little differently in my office, and the results were astounding. And I ended up telling somebody about it I'm in Arizona. I told somebody in Seattle, and this guy was like, really? Well, he ended up telling a guy who was a consultant back then, a very popular consultant for chiropractors and dentists. His name was Greg Stanley, and he had Whitehall Management, and it was very popular back then. And he had a service where he would interview thought leaders and experts in the professions, and he would interview them, and then he would put the interview on a cassette tape. So that's how far back this
I
goes.
knew exactly where that was going, by the way, because I immediately knew this is before podcasts, and this involves cassette tapes or CDs, like one of the two.
These are the cassette tape days. So he would put it on a cassette tape, and then these doctors would subscribe to this, and pay a monthly thing, and he would just send out these cassette tapes.
Yeah.
So as a favor to this guy in Seattle that I told my story to, he would interview me, and he was in Arizona, so it was an easy drive for me. So I get to his studio, and this is how, so I never met him before. This is what he says to me when we first meet. He says, Greg, I really don't know if you have anything of interest or important to say that will be of any benefit to, well, anyone. So he said, so we'll do the interview, and maybe I'll put you on the B side, and I'm like, okay, whatever. So we start going, and he starts interviewing me, and you could tell from his body language and the questions he's asking, he just is not interested at all in this thing. But then I told him this story about what had happened. And suddenly his whole body language changed, and his whole tone changed. And now he's looking at me like with interest. And now he's asking me a whole set of different questions. And we get through this story in this interview, and we're finished. And he yells to his recording guy who was running the reel-to-reel tape recorder. If that, and he says, cut. He said, oh my gosh, Greg. He said, I've suspected for years now that there is something missing in chiropractic. There is something missing. There's like two cliffs, and in between the cliffs, there's just space where people would fall. And he said, there's something missing between what chiropractors do and what chiropractors think and what the rest of the world thinks and wants. And in between that is just nothing. And that's where people fall and die. He said, I thought for years that there's got to be something, a bridge that connects the two, but I've never been able to find it. And he looks at me and he says, this is it. This is the bridge. He said, I'm astounded. I looked at him and I said, so do you think what I had to say had any, I don't know, importance or relevance? He's like, yeah, sorry about that. So I got, not only did I get the A side, I got both the A and the B side of the cassette tape with that.
That's so funny.
But that was, that was early on in this journey into very exciting subjects. And it was like, that was the bridge. That was the thing that could connect it, if anybody cares.
I think I first of all, I said it as a joke. You obviously know that. We were talking beforehand, so I was just joking. But I do think that there are there's an interesting parallel with the documentation world where it's like you're trying to teach people this and trying to help them, and the business and marketing world that I'm in, because I don't think that chiropractors are generally interested in business and marketing. I mean, there's going to be that small percentage that are a little more entrepreneurial and a little bit more interested in owning a business and kind of doing their thing. But the vast majority of them, they aren't. They learn about business and marketing to whatever the lowest competence level is possible to accomplish what they want to really accomplish. And I would imagine that documentation is the same way, where there's probably different levels to doing it, as far as extremely well and then just terribly. And then there's something in the middle. And I would imagine that a lot of people that reach out to you and talk to you are probably just trying to get to whatever competent level they need to get to achieve what they want to, without doing any more than they absolutely have to, because they're not really
Sure.
interested in documentation.
Right. What's the least I could do
Yeah.
that keeps me out of trouble and and is fast and is free, or
Yeah.
as inexpensive as possible? Yeah,
Fast and
I
free.
understand. I get it too. I mean, I'm in my, what am I, my 36th, almost 37th year of practice. And I've been playing with software since let's see, since they were on floppy disks,
Yeah.
right? That goes back a little while, when, when this is before Windows and stuff. So, I've been experimenting with software for many years and documentation on that. And it's just, yeah, I get how we think, and I don't really blame them for that. That's just kind of, I mean, when I graduated from chiropractic school, we were using travel cards simply because there was no such thing as personal computers. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was all we had. And, we did that for a while, and then we tried to, make it a little bit more efficient and legible with software, and to various degrees of success.
My I feel like I always say that I was born in 1980. I was the last um the last kind of group of free range kids. Like my generation was the last generation that kind of experienced the old world and kind of witnessed the new world. And like my kids now, like they don't understand any of the stuff we're talking about. Like they don't understand a life before cell phones. They don't understand not having the internet. If they hear that dial-up sound, they don't know what it is. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's like it's that sort of thing. And it is I think it's always interesting to talk to a chiropractor, or talk really anyone, but talk to a chiropractor or business owner or anything like that, that is kind of witness kind of that transition from old world to new world. And it's that willingness there's it's that willingness to kind of learn something new and kind of learn a technology. And because I feel like it was easier for me because it sort of happened very organically, very naturally. And when I was early in practice, all this stuff was kind of happening at the same time. So as I'm learning new things, I'm learning new technology, and it was sort of natural. I wasn't ingrained in the old world. I dipped my toe in it and I saw it. But for you guys in your generation, I would imagine that there was a group of people that just refused to embrace it and sort of died on the vine. And those who have leaned into it a little bit more, like you have, where they're just more willing to learn new skills and stuff, maybe 10, 15 years after they've been out of practice, have done okay. Is that what you have seen?
Yeah, there's a number of, I review records of chiropractors for insurance companies and audits and state boards, and at just a doctor's request sometimes. And I see stuff. And the I'm going to call them the veteran chiropractors, like me, who started off on travel cards because that was their only option.
Yeah.
They never moved on from that, and they never learned what to do after that. So I see their documentation. I'm like, and I'm thinking, have you really not been to a seminar in the last 30 years or so? Because I mean, this is, and they would get so upset with me because I would just crush them. I would crush all their hopes and dreams. And I'm like, no, I said, I'm not biased about this. I said, I just know the rules and you don't. So you are just kind of floating in the air, just very vulnerable to any kind of an attack. If you would simply learn the rules, then you could do fine with this. So I do see a lot, but I'm surprised though when I see younger, newer chiropractors who really should know better, still doing that kind of stuff. Those are the ones that really concern me the most is the newer ones, the ones in practice for, let's say, less than 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, I kind of get the idea that either they just don't care, or they care, but they're so confused because they keep hearing such different information all the time that they don't know who's telling the truth or who's just trying to sell stuff or what. So they're like, I'm just not going to make a change yet until I have a better handle on that. So
So
I see both
what is the
sides.
difference? What is the difference for those? Because I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast, there's probably just as many people doing insurance as people that are running some sort of cash practice. What is the documentation competence or level necessary versus those two things? Or do you view them as they should be the same, or do they have to be the same? Because obviously when you're doing insurance, I think you have to be accountable to a different level. I know in my practice, when I was still practicing, the documentation that I admittedly did with a cash patient looked different than if I had a PI patient or a car accident patient or something like that. Like it was just much more, there was more detail in the car accident stuff because I was kind of taught you document like you're going to end up in court someday and have to defend it. And so that was kind of the approach there, but I didn't take that approach with cash. Like what is your feeling about the difference between cash and insurance and documentation?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I rail on this topic. Chiropractors are the only specialty in all of healthcare that I'm aware of that even considers that even would think about that. Like from a healthcare perspective, why would it matter who's paying for the services, how
Yeah.
we document? There's no difference. Now, I will say this for a personal injury or a workers' comp thing, there are some additional things we may need to document where we document the injury and what happened.
Yeah.
And maybe the exam is a little bit different on those. But for everybody, but the foundation of documentation should be identical for everyone. I mean, I still see patients, and my documentation for a cash paying patient is the same as for Blue Cross or Aetna, which is the same for Medicare, which is the same for personal injury. But again, with personal injury, there's going to be a few additional things I need to do, but the
Yeah.
foundation is the same. And it always amazes me. I'm like, where did chiropractors come up with that? Did somebody teach that back in the day that, oh yeah, depending on who's paying for the services, because could you imagine a medical doctor, like an exam? Would you do a different exam on a patient
Yeah.
based on who's paying for the services? Because the issue is I also get to deal with malpractice suits, either in defense of or against chiropractors. I get to deal with state board complaints with chiropractors. I get to deal, and that never comes up. It doesn't come up who paid for the services. Was your documentation below the standard of care, or was it, did it at least meet the standard of care? So yeah, it's this. Now, I will say this, for a wellness patient who has no symptoms, who just likes to come in periodically for an adjustment, but they feel fine.
Yeah.
It's still the same foundation, but it's a little bit less because like the subjective part of your SOAP note, they have no symptoms.
Yeah.
So I would just document they have no symptoms. They're here for a wellness visit, but
Yeah.
I would still document the other things that I need to do because every procedure that I perform in a patient must be justified in my notes. So yeah, it always amazes me that when cash practice, I mean, let's face it, in most states right now, insurance reimbursement is just terrible.
Yeah.
Or at least it's getting worse. My state of Arizona, if we're not the worst in the country for insurance reimbursement, we've got to be top 3 worst. I mean, it's just, it's awful. It's awful here. So even when somebody has insurance, they're paying, more out of pocket, a copay.
Sure.
Also but it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter at all who's paying for it. So we have to document a certain way regardless. My thing is, I just want you to be able to do it exceptionally well in the least amount of time, with the least amount of effort and the least amount of cost. Get the hell out of there, but do it right.
I actually had 2 thoughts. One, as soon as you started saying that, I had this like moment in my brain where I went, duh. Like, because like there's the chiropractor in me that
Right.
having different notes for cash and insurance makes total sense. Like
Total
I've
sense.
never considered. And what's funny is my wife is a nurse practitioner and she's a psych nurse practitioner. And she's always talking to me about patients. She's meticulous about, she's the type of person you want to work for you. You know, she's just meticulous about notes. She does an incredible job. She is not a cut the corners type of person. And she's always very concerned about, she used to work in the ER and stuff. So it's like she's very concerned about documentation because if it's not done right, you know, she's going to get in trouble someday and she's got to
Mhm.
defend herself. And I, as soon as you said that, I thought about her and I thought, well, she would never do that. Like she would never skimp on her
She wouldn't even
exam, her
consider it.
questions,
Yeah.
her documentation. She would never do any of that just
Wouldn't
because it's
cross her mind.
somebody who doesn't have it. It never would have ever crossed her mind ever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had this like weird split in my brain that just happened where I was going, huh, like
Huh.
now I have a guess. I'm going to throw out my guess. My guess is that it tends to be more of a philosophical thing. So you would find more of the chiropractors who have this idea that they almost feel guilty or bad about, or that they're not a real chiropractor if they're treating anything, because they have that like super vitalistic approach to chiropractic. So I would think that they're doing it because they consider the minimum that they do all that's necessary, even though obviously insurance companies and any sort of court would probably disagree, but they probably consider that all that's necessary for them to do what they correct subluxations and do what they're going to do. And they would consider the extra stuff that's for insurance as extra things. So they probably aren't thinking of it as they are skimping on the cash patient. They're probably thinking, I'm just doing what I need to do and I have to do more if I'm going to do insurance. Like that would be my guess. Now,
Yeah,
you probably
maybe.
say they're wrong, but
Well, and that's where it goes. Like, who taught them that? Where
other
did they learn
chiropractors,
that? Yeah, because I doubt it was in any of the schools,
sure.
unless it
I,
was like 45, 50 years ago or so. But it's a
hmm,
kind of a thing where like I said, the worst cases I've been involved with happen to be state board complaints and malpractice cases. And the question of who paid for the services doesn't even come up.
I don't
And
imagine it would.
yeah, and doctors say, oh, well, I had one doctor that was a state board issue, and he just left the profession. It got so bad for him. And he was telling me that he said, I don't document well. I'm a cash practice. I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? I said, you're now in front of the state board. They don't care if you're a cash practice. Why
Yep.
do you think that that's okay to do it that way? Now, I was on a podcast recently, and the interviewer asked me, well, what's the one thing? What's the one thing you can narrow down to one thing that we need to document that we're not? I'm like, easy. We need to document improvement. If again, unless it's a wellness patient but if it's a typical new patient comes in and they have at least one condition, right? Don't we want
Yeah,
to help them?
sure.
Of course, that's what we're doing. So we have to show if our treatment is resulting in improvement in their condition or conditions, period. The issue though is there is just a very specific way in which we're required to do that, which is super easy. And it can be done really, really quickly with that. But and actually it works perfectly for chiropractors because chiropractors get great outcomes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's never been our problem. Where the medical profession, they don't get such great outcomes a lot of times. So if I had to tell you, if like there was a study a couple of years ago that found that of all medical interventions, whether it was prescribed drugs, injections, procedures, surgeries, positive outcomes were about 48% of the time.
Yeah.
So less than half. So if you were getting less than half of your patients better, and I told you that you are now required to document those poor outcomes, that would kind of suck. But for chiropractors, we get great outcomes. We just have to show it.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. And so when a chiropractor when they argue with me and they say, I don't want to, I'm like, why would you not want to? You're getting great outcomes. The hard part's done. This is the easy stuff. You do this. And the problem is it's so bad. Our documentation is so bad that it's not only affecting individual doctors and their practices, it's affecting the entire profession.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire profession, we run into this wall and we just keep like, I'm on different advisory boards and different volunteer things within the profession. And, I hear, we're trying to do stuff with the government, the federal government, and we hear the same stuff all the time. And it comes back to our documentation.
I actually think that that is an interesting conversation, because one of the things that I will mention a lot with chiropractors, because I already had said to you, like, hey, a lot of chiropractors aren't entrepreneurial. Well, if that's the case, it would be great if chiropractic had the infrastructure to give people a good job. Like, you could leave school, you could go work for someone or for a facility or something. You could make six figures. You could make a fair wage for how much time and energy and effort, money you've spent on your career, just like a nurse practitioner, just like a dentist, just like a whatever. You could go do that. Or if you wanted to own your own place, you could go do that. Well, in most cases, the chiropractors don't have that option. It's like you start your own practice, or you make not nearly enough money to justify the
Mhm.
time and effort, energy for the degree. And so there's an infrastructure issue. And I think one of the things that leads to the infrastructure being better is reimbursement. I don't have a lot of hope for reimbursement, but I tell people over and over again when they complain about, like, I wish I could just get a job. I wish I could get a job. And I say, well, the problem is we don't have the reimbursement structure that is that can warrant you getting paid what you're worth.
Right.
And as I'm thinking about this, as you're talking, I'm going, why is that? And the reason is because if you go back to the Mercedes 80s, and you had talked about on your website about kind of, you're on the tail end of that beautiful, wonderful era, which
And a
I did not
magical time.
experience. Oh, I've heard about it. I've
You
heard
were
about
8.
I've heard about the land of milk and honey, but I never experienced it. But it's like, if you could flip a switch and now, like, oh, we're going to go back to that. We got a law passed where now, deductibles are low and copays are low, and you're going to reimbursement is high. Chiropractors are just going to ruin it within a matter of just a few years,
Mhm.
because they're gonna overbill. They're gonna not justify their care. They're gonna do, because they don't do that thing, the insurance reimbursement, the treatment protocols, the documentation. They don't do it right. They don't do it the way that's necessary to participate in that system.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to kind of hear you talk about that, because I'm like, yeah, that is, if all chiropractors, if you could flip a switch and all chiropractors documented properly the way they're supposed to, we are many, many steps closer to insurance reimbursement that everybody wants.
So what's interesting is I'm on the Medicare advisory board with the ACA, and I would get this, and one of our missions, our big mission, is to get Congress to accept chiropractors as full physicians. So we have full physician status, which means that if we get this bill passed, and every year we get a little closer, if we get this bill passed, that Medicare would pay chiropractors not just for the adjustment of the spine, but for everything that we do that's within our scope of practice.
Yeah,
And that would still be at the Medicare reimbursable rate,
sure.
but at least it'd be for more than just the adjustment to the spine.
Yep.
So I get these chiropractors saying, even when I joined that group, they're like, Greg, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? I'm like, well, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's very exciting that we could do that. But on the other hand, and they're like, why would you not be excited about this? I said, because I'm afraid that if they allow it, if they give us full physician status, and we continue to suck at this,
Yep.
how long is it going to take for them to say, you know what? Because they do these audits of chiropractors over the years, and they have these OIG reports that come out. And chiropractors have just been awful. We're not just awful at documentation. We're 5 times worse than everyone else in healthcare. 5 times worse than everybody else. And they would audit doctors, and they would say, okay, this is what we found. So you just need to fix, these are the problems, fix this, and this. Chiropractors would say, oh yeah, okay. And then they would give us a couple of years to kind of get into the groove. Then they would audit again. And it was the same thing. At what point are they going to say, you know what? You're just not even worth our time anymore. We're going to cut you out of the system entirely.
Yeah.
Now, there are chiropractors that they don't want full inclusion in Medicare. There are chiropractors that say, Greg, I just want to be able to opt out of Medicare completely.
Yeah.
Can't you do that? I'm like, well, we have to get full physician status first, and then we could talk about an opt-out provision. But where we are now, we can't do that yet. The problem is everyone follows Medicare. CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they create all the rules for all of this stuff, even for your non-Medicare patients. It's for everybody. That we talked about, like cash patient. They create the rules. You got to do this for everybody. So if Medicare boots us out, what do you think Blue Cross is going to do?
Yeah.
And United and Aetna. And again, some chiropractors will be like, yay, we're out of the system. All right, so now you're going to have to somehow find a way to, your rates are going to come down, and you have to make it super, super affordable for your patients, right? And you got to be really, really good and charismatic. And
It's a volume game. I mean, if you're going to do a cash practice, it's a volume game. Like it just is. Like it's anyone who, anytime reimbursement, and as reimbursement has gotten lower and lower and lower and lower over the years, like the only way you compensate for that as a chiropractor is volume. Like that's the only, you have to see more people in a shorter amount of time.
I had friends back in the day that were high volume, and it cracks me up because today you hear a doctor, oh, I'm high volume. What does that mean to you? Oh, I see 50 patients a day. I'm like, that's not high volume.
Yeah.
High volume is, my friends back in the day were seeing 1,200 patients a week. That's high volume. And they're like, what do they do? And I'm like, so high volume offices like that, it was the price per adjustment was very, very low. It was about $20 per adjustment. How did they make any money? Do the math. $20 times 1,200 patients a week.
Yep.
They're pulling in about $80,000 a month in cash.
Yep.
That works. But you seeing 50 patients a week at $20, that's not gonna work very well for you.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's what happens.
So tell me, I was reading on your website, and I actually really liked, because I have that initial kickback against documentation that anyone would have, even though I don't even have to do it anymore. So it's like, it's not something I would ever enjoy, did enjoy it, whatever. And honestly, it's intimidating. Like, even I could listen to you, and I could be someone, if I was still in practice, I could listen to you and I'd be like, you know what? Greg's making some really freaking good points. That doesn't make it less intimidating, and it doesn't make it less scary. And I do think there's a parallel with owning your own business and business and marketing, because there's a lot of things that I teach to people that would make their life better if you just went through the hassle of learning this skill or developing this habit. It's like, it would be better in the end, but they're so afraid of kind of starting down that process and so scared to do it that they just don't do it. And one of the things I read, that you wrote, and I don't know how long ago you wrote this, but you just talked about there's really only 3 things that need to be documented. And that statement alone, I went, that don't sound too bad. You know what I mean? Like it's like, it was okay. Like 3, I could do 3, like 3's not bad. So talk me through that just a little bit, and get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts about, you're talking about making it simple, making it to where, people can start doing this in a time efficient way and doing it in a level that they should be doing it. Because that's the thing that, like, right, we're talking in theory, but then it's like, okay, how do we actually, what are some of the applicable steps here that make it so someone can actually become the doctor that they should be?
So that's a great question, because in my webinars, I talk about this. I call it the 3 little things, just 3 little things. If we would just fix these 3 little things, life could be amazing.
Yeah.
Yet it seems like we just choose not to. Nah, I don't want to do that. But it's 3 little things. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm good.
Yeah.
So what are the 3 things? All right. Number 1, we've got to document properly that first visit.
Yeah.
Right. The history, the exam, got to document that. Right. The second thing is going to be, we've got to document the daily visits, right? All the visits after that first visit. Okay. And my metaphor that I used for years is a NASCAR race. So, like, imagine a driver gets into a car and they start the engine and it's really big and loud and powerful. That engine is your exam. And let's say the driver, they're in the car and they're putting their foot on the gas and they're playing with the steering wheel and they're, turning the radio on if there was a radio in this car, but the car remains in neutral. Does that car go anywhere? No, because you've got all this power in the engine, but you're in neutral. You go nowhere. That's what happens when you have a good first visit documented, but your daily notes suck. You have all this power behind you, you go nowhere. On the other hand, the driver gets in the car, they don't start the engine, and they're playing with stuff in the car. Does that car go anywhere? No, because it never started the engine. That's what happens when you've got good daily notes, but that first visit sucked. You have all this power, you go nowhere. But what happens when you have a really good first visit and then you document the subsequent visits properly? Now you have a big engine, you shift into gear, you're starting to move around the track, but then every driver has to stop periodically throughout the race to put gas in the car, change the tires, change the oil, whatever. And those are pit stops for the drivers. Well, can bad things happen if drivers miss or skip pit stops? Bad things happen. Well, as doctors, do we have pit stops in our patient management? Of course. They're called reevaluations, right? So those are the three things: that initial visit, history and exam, the subsequent visits, and the reevaluations. Just those three things is all we need to fix. But most chiropractors are like, nah, I'm good. Now, here's the thing, though. We are required to do certain things. And who requires it? This comes from CMS, Medicare. It's not just a Medicare thing, though. I'm telling you, they create the plan. Everyone else follows it. All the insurers follow it. The state boards follow it. Everybody. It's the same thing, which makes my life easier because otherwise I'd have to be teaching 8 different things all the time. Same thing. They require that we use certain specific metrics, just numbers, right? They don't want you to say neck pain better. That's meaningless. They want you to say the neck pain was a 7 out of 10. Now it's a 5 out of 10. Oh, okay. We can relate to that. Or the frequency of the neck pain, which most chiropractors don't pay attention to. And it's
I could see that.
Probably because the frequency, maybe the intensity stayed the same, but the frequency is improving. All right. Remember, the key is we've got to show if the condition's improving or not. And if we only have one metric that we're documenting and that one metric doesn't show improvement, we got a problem. So we need more than one metric. So the other metric is frequency. So, all right, maybe the first visit went from 100% of the time, and then today it's 80% of the time. Okay, that shows measurable improvement. And then the third thing that's required are the use of functional outcome questionnaires. And this is the one that's missing from everybody. Hardly anybody's doing this. It's required. It's required for the active patient. Again, not the maintenance or wellness, but for the active patient, a functional outcome questionnaire for each condition that you're treating. All we need to do, we just want to monitor their progress. That's it. So a lot of chiropractors think that I need to do a re-exam every 30 days. I'm like, really? What re-exam are you talking about? Well, the ortho neuro. And I'm like, why do you need to do that every? This comes up in social media. They say, oh, you need to do it every 30 days. I'm like, really? According to whom? And now they're concerned because they know who I am, and they're like, isn't that what you teach? No. No. Who? I said, who told you that you need to do a re-exam, that re-exam every 30 days? Medicare? Really? Where? Can you tell me where they said that? They don't say that. And they're like, wait a minute, what? I'm like, what they say is we need to monitor the patient's progress, but that's not how we do it. They want us to do it with these functional outcome questionnaires. That's it. That's it. That's the easiest thing in the world. So all these doctors doing these ortho neuro re-exams every 30 days, I'm just rolling my eyes. I'm like, why are you even doing that? You don't need to do that. That's not even indicated, right? There are certain things that would indicate that kind of re-exam, but monitoring progress is something that's required throughout the case until the problem's resolved or they're released or maintenance or whatever it's going to be. And it's super. And when we do these metrics properly, and we can do this with technology, we can actually have technology do the second half of the SOAP note for us. So one of the things in the SOAP note is the assessment part of the SOAP note, which everybody misses. Nobody knows exactly what we're supposed to do in the assessment. This is where CMS says we've got to show how each condition has responded since the previous visit. You're not just going to say neck pain and neck pain. That doesn't do it. But again, if you say neck pain was a 7 out of 10, now it's a 5 out of 10. That's an improvement of 28%. Frequency went from 100% to 80% since 2 days ago. That's a 20% improvement. That's something that we could show that actually works in our favor, that we can now show the world how effective we are measurably, not just saying stuff, but measurably and functionally effective with that. And that's exactly what they're looking for. And it works perfectly for us because we get those good outcomes like that. So yeah, I look at all these different software programs out there. I'm like, they're not doing it though. You're not, because they don't understand it. They don't know that that's a requirement.
So a couple things. One, as just a comment, I tend to feel like I don't know what the percentage is because there's no way to put a percentage on it. But I feel like there's a percentage of chiropractors who don't really understand how good chiropractic is. Like they don't, because they're just, I think, so used to, they don't understand how good it is because they put so much, they beat themselves up so much when someone doesn't do well. And I have people that I talk to and clients that I'll talk to, and they're just brutal to themselves in their own psyche when it's like they have a patient that doesn't respond well to care. And I'm always like, so what? Like, did you do your best? Did you do everything that you could have done? Did you, it's like there's no guarantee. And the number of people that do incredibly well, even within the context of these offices, that are talking to me, is really, really high. And I'm just always blown away sometimes by just, I don't know, maybe it's just the self doubt or self like beating themselves up or kind of whatever. And I'm all for like, do everything the best you can, become better at it and whatever. But chiropractic, even when not done great, gets some pretty good results. And I'm always surprised at the number of chiropractors that don't seem to realize that.
It's amazing. I see part of the problem is treatment plans, because we went through a phase in the profession where chiropractors were recommending these really long, year-long treatment plans.
Sure.
That was really devastating to the profession. I mean, it made the public trust chiropractors far less. I mean, it was terrible. And I remember when that started, and I did it back in the day, and I was really good at it. In fact, I was so good at getting patients to sign up for a 1-year treatment plan that I thought to myself, if I'm that good at doing a 1-year treatment plan, how would I be at a 2-year treatment plan? So I started selling 2-year treatment plans. I was even better at that because the price the monthly cost went down.
Yeah.
So I was like, I did that for a few months, and then I felt just really dirty and ugly. I stopped doing it. But then the pendulum then swung so far the other direction. So now I hear these young chiropractors saying, I say, well, what's your treatment plan for new patient? And they say 2 visits. I'm like, are you high?
Yeah.
I said, what do you tell the patient? If I can't get you better in 2 visits, I'm like, oh my gosh, I said, you must walk on water. Who told you that? I said, do you know what D.D. Palmer, the original treatment plan in chiropractic was? D.D. Palmer's treatment plan. And I found this out years ago from there's an organization called something like the Historical Society of Chiropractic or something to those, and they have all this historical stuff. Really fascinating. D.D. Palmer's original treatment plan was 6 visits per week for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That was it. He said, if I can't get you better, 6 visits a week for 2 weeks, I don't think I can help you. So I'm like, why do you think that 2 visits? So if you can't get somebody better in 2 visits, so it's not that you didn't do a good job, but you just didn't go long enough, perhaps. So I said, there's the treatment plans. You need to give yourself at least a bit of some kind of time. And there's a standard. If you want to talk evidence-based, the research says that a standard protocol, a treatment plan, is 4 weeks. That doesn't mean that's your total treatment plan. That's your standard first trial of care is 4 weeks. And then you treat in that trial, and then you reassess. And if the patient needs more care, then you've justified that. Do another trial of 4 weeks, and another, and another, and another. if that's justified.
You talk about the documentation, like I'm always blown away by that. What I call people management. It's I am blown away at the just absolute bumbling incompetence that chiropractors have, whether they're it's real bad when you're brand new, but it's even chiropractors have been out for 10 or 15 years, and I'll talk to them, and they seem to do these extremes where either I do a year-long care plan or I don't do anything. There's no method to the madness. Like they're just like, well, we'll adjust you today and see how it goes. It's like there's absolutely no plan at all. And then there's some different versions, but they tend to either be really, really long or really, really short. And people seem to think that whatever they decided the first day they saw the person is what they have to stick with forever. And it's like, why do you think that? Like, d-
I think
d-
one of the problems is in the chiropractic schools, and we all have to do X number of adjustments or see X number of patients in order to graduate with
yeah,
that. The problem is in the clinics at the schools, you have a lot of the patients in the clinics are maintenance patients that have been coming in once or whatever for the
forever. Yeah.
last 18 years. So these interns in the student clinics are seeing a lot of wellness patients. They're not seeing the acute stages, the acute care. So they don't know. So I don't know if they're being taught treatment plans or not. But when they get to that point, they're not seeing those patients typically. So that's very confusing, and it's a confusing message that they're getting. And then they get out of practice, they get out of clinic, they're starting in practice, and they have no idea. And then they work for somebody, and somebody's teaching them how to present the long term, and then they're feeling really weird about that, and it's a nightmare. I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. There are actual guidelines that we can use that are accepted throughout healthcare. I mean, multiple guidelines. They all say the same thing. We follow this set of guidelines. We're golden.
Yeah.
We do great at this, but it's all about that reassessment.
One of the things that I got to where I told all my patients later in practice, like it obviously wasn't early because I had no idea what I was doing, but later in practice, one of the little lines I tacked on to every single time I went through recommendations with someone is I would always tell them, if you do better than expected, we'll probably see you less. And if you do worse than expected, we may see you a little more.
Yeah.
And it, and I was like, I'm giving myself some buffer because I'm fully aware of the fact that there are people that respond incredibly fast to care that is just almost out of left field where I'm like, never would have saw that. Did not expect them to be doing so well so quickly. Even though the healing process can take time, like if you're feeling better and functioning better, like I don't see any reason why we have to continue doing intense care. So it's like we can back you down based on how you're doing. On the flip side of it, there are people that they're showing improvement, but it is baby step improvement, and this is harder than I thought it was going to be. And we're going to have to see you more, or we're going to have to see you for more for longer. And I'm perfectly fine with that because I don't have a freaking crystal ball. And it's amazing to me to always hear the amount of stress that chiropractors put themselves under because they think that they're supposed to know exactly how every person is going to respond to care for some imaginary period of time. And I just like, why do we do that? It just blows my mind. And I think probably part of it is what you talked about.
Yeah. For since I started practicing, which I will not say what year that was, but you could guess. You were a little boy.
1980s. Wait, it was 89,
No, 80,
7.
I graduated at the end of 86. I started in 1987. You were
I remember
7.
reading it on your website. I knew it
Yeah.
was late 80s. So I'm
So
going to out
ever
you.
since then, every chiropractor always wants to know from other chiropractors, what is your report of findings?
Yeah.
Right? What is the magic report of findings
What are the
that
words?
will get what are the magic words that will get people, patients? And this is even then when insurance was good. And everybody wanted to know. And I remember one consultant taught, we were doing, we would have the patient sit down and then we would play videotapes of
Yeah,
stuff.
I've been
And
there.
then one consultant had a 4-day report of findings that he taught. I'm like, we're all over the place. Everybody wants to know.
The mandatory
Right.
class, the
The
bring your
spinal care
family.
class, right. Did all that stuff. And I've told people for years that the one thing that I have noticed over the years, that most of the of the financially successful chiropractors with big practices, just an observation, they tend to have the most outgoing and charismatic personalities.
Yeah.
They're naturally good at sales.
Yep.
And that was, and I thought that was kind of disgusting. That was kind of gross. I hate to think that in healthcare that we're, but I know everybody says, everything is sales. I'm like, I get that, but I mean, come on, shouldn't have to be sales like that. So
You know what I
what
always say?
about
I always say no one refers their grandma to the chiropractor hoping that he closes her. Go ahead.
So what about the introverted chiropractors? What are they
Yeah.
supposed to do? Are they like completely shut out of the equation?
Yeah.
So I'm like, so then they're like, okay, Greg, big shot. What is your reported findings? I said, my reported findings is completely devoid of personality. It's not my personality. It's not my outgoing nature. It's not my salesmanship. It's numbers. And it's all evidence-based. And people like, and do people go for it? I'm like, all the time. There's not even a hesitation with it. All right.
Yeah.
So what is it? So again, this is all with the, all with the rules and regulations, requirements, and how do we do reporting? So I tell the patient, look, we're starting with you. Based on your history, I've got to do an exam. It's going to be orthopedic test, neurologic test, some vital signs. I expect everything to be fine. Right. You don't have a history that I'm concerned about stuff, but we got to do it anyway, just to make sure. So we do that exam, and all right, I was right. Everything was fine there. Now I said, I've already captured your metrics of intensity and frequency for each condition. I've had you complete a functional outcome questionnaire for each condition, and we scored them. These are our numbers. These are our metrics. A standard protocol is to begin with a trial of care of 4 weeks, right? 4 weeks. Said at your level, I think probably twice a week would be sufficient. So twice a week for 4 weeks. That's our first trial of care. However, our goal is to get you, again, this is all backed by research. Our goal is to get at least 30% improvement for each of those metrics after 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But we're going to reassess you at the midpoint. I'm going to ask you every time I see you about the intensity frequency. I'm going to track them as we go. But at the midpoint of the trial, 2 weeks, or in this case, 4 visits, whichever comes first, we're going to reassess the functional outcome questionnaire. And we're looking for at least a 15% improvement. And if you're there, at least 15%, we know we're moving in the right direction. And we continue the trial, go another 2 weeks and so on.
Yeah.
Maybe at 2 weeks, you feel great and all your numbers are zero. And we do a trial with withdrawal of care. Everything's great. And I say, beautiful job. Let me know when I can be of service again to you.
Yeah.
And that's it, because we want lifetime patients, not long-term patients. There's a big difference there. Lifetime patients, everyone in healthcare wants lifetime patients. I want you to be a patient of mine for your entire life and that of your family. And it could be a few visits here and a few visits there, but over 30 years.
Yep.
That's really what everybody wants. So I'm like, you do this. So everybody, I mean, can you handle that? Can you handle 4 weeks or twice a week? Yeah, I can do that. All right. So we'll reassess at the midpoints, because I don't want to drag this out longer if we don't need to. And people go, yeah, I'm good. So we schedule them and then we check them in, 2 weeks later. Hey, you're like 42% improved. You're doing great.
Yeah.
There's still a little ways to go. So let's go another couple of weeks. Okay. It makes sense to them. And there's no personality. There's no salesmanship. There's no nothing. I'm just basing it on numbers. And, for my EHR is designed to track that for me. So I don't have to do all that. I just put the numbers in and it calculates for me and it figures out. So I can just tell the patient, oh, wow, look at that. You're doing great. Or you're not, we're not where I'd like you to be. I need to change something. Let's do a different technique, a different modality, a different procedure. And we'll go another 2 weeks and we'll see if that makes a difference with it.
Yep.
And
it's people management.
Yeah. It's very clean.
Yeah.
It's very easy. And patients appreciate it. It's very, very, very patient-centered. Very patient-centered with that.
I've told chiropractors for years, you talk about raging against things. Like I rage against the using PVA as a metric for retention. It really makes me mad. And the reason it makes me mad is because to me, retention is maintaining the doctor-patient relationship over a period of time. And I always use my dad as an example. My dad passed away 8 years ago, but when I started, he never went to the chiropractor until I started. I was mostly through school, and then he started letting me work on him a little bit, and he benefited from it, and he really liked it. It helped his back. He used to have numbness and tingling in his hands. It did better with care, so he really liked it. But as much as I told my dad the benefits of chiropractic beyond his hands tingling and his back hurting, he was never going to go to me or anyone else unless his back was hurting or his hands were tingling. And that was going to be it. And my dad was a loyal, they moved out of the area so that I didn't treat him, the whole time, the rest of his life. But even when he moved down to Georgia, he went to a chiropractor and he was a loyal patient, but he was never going to be someone who showed up every week, no matter what. He just wasn't.
Right.
And so what I would tell my docs is what you're attempting to do is once you establish the relationship, you become their chiropractor. They feel like you can help them. You feel like you can help them. Like everything kind of is aligned and they become your patient. When they use a chiropractor, you want them to call you. That's it. Like
Right.
whether it's once a year, twice a year, 100 times a year, whatever, when they feel the need to use a chiropractor and they're under the care of a chiropractor, you want them to pick up the phone and call you. You don't want them looking through the yellow pages. You don't want them searching Google. You don't want them checking out the latest thing, the person who just opened up who's 5 seconds closer. Like you don't want any of that stuff. They have a chiropractor because you're their chiropractor. Like that's what retention is. And that's like my chiropractor. It's like I don't shop around for a chiropractor. It's like when I go to Dr. Vagno, like that's who I go to. Like I don't go to anybody else. And that's what you want. That's what retention is, that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whenever that person needed a chiropractor, they called you. That's real retention, not hitting 100 visits in 6 months or hitting 150 visits in 2 years or whatever the number is you're shooting for. Like that's not retention.
So PVA, I mean, that's been a metric for so many years in our profession. And yeah, it was always like the average PVA for chiropractors was always like 10 or 12 or something like that. And
Yeah.
like, and I told people years ago, I said, well, my PVA back in the day, my PVA was 300. And they're like, what? I'm like, okay, so let me explain what that means. That means I have a lot of patients that are coming in once a week. It also means I have no new patients.
Yeah, when you're running the quick and dirty calculation of
Yeah.
PVA, if you have a bad, like actually any old chiropractor that has a bad month can have a really high PVA.
Yeah. I have 0 new patients. That's why my PVA, if I see 100 patients in a month and I had 1 new patient, my PVA was 100.
Which is why the number's stupid.
It's so stupid. Yeah. Oh, wait, that just doesn't work. But the problem with the long-term treatment plans, again, I did it. I mean, I got
Yeah,
sucked into
same.
that.
Me too.
And the reason we did that was because even when insurance was good, chiropractors still were not very good at getting a consistent flow of new patients, even when insurance was good. It's just, now some are exceptional at it, but most were not. So the consultant said, well, if chiropractors have a problem getting new patients, we need to find a way to keep the ones that they do get.
Yep.
And that's when the long-term treatment plans came in. And I remember I was able to use my personality and, patients would do it. But the problem is it became such a problem. And then it became a state board issue because, we would present this long-term treatment, but, it's going to take 57 visits over the next 12 months, a number that we just made up, based on nothing, 57 visits over 12 months. And let me break it down for you. We're going to do an exam here. We're going to do adjustments in these modalities. We need to re-exams every month. And then here's the pricing for each of those. So when we add it all up, we do a spreadsheet, we add it all up, it's going to be $8,300 over the next 12 months. But we verified your insurance. And back when insurance was pretty good, we figured your insurance will pay about $2,000 of that. So we subtract that out. That brings your balance down to about $6,300. If you prepay that, we will discount that by 18% Or if you're willing to, if you want to be able to divide it up into 12 monthly payments, and we have your credit card on file and we'll do it automatically, we'll give you that same 18% discount. So it ends up being maybe the patient's paying between $300 and $400 a month, or whatever the number is going to be. And these patients who come in pain are like, sign me up, I'll do it. They do that, and then you start doing it, everything's great. And then 2 weeks later, the patient says, oh my gosh, doctor, I got to tell you, you're a miracle worker. This is the best. This is the best I've ever felt in my entire life. I've got things feeling better that I didn't know were not feeling good to begin. I'm going to tell my entire family and friends about you. I'll be a patient of yours for life, right? And then the patient said, and doctor's like, well, yeah, thank you. It's glad to be helpful. And then the patient says, but I'm going to stop coming in because I feel great. I'm going to stop coming in, but I will be back when there's a problem again. And then the doctor says, well, but we're going to still hit your credit card every month.
Yep.
The next 11 and a half months. And the patient says, why? Well, you signed an agreement. And the patient says, but I don't need that now. Well, you signed an agreement. And all that goodwill that you had about 3 seconds ago is completely gone now. Now you've pissed off the patient. Now they're going to file a complaint against you to the board. The board is going to say, send us your records. And then the whole thing falls apart. And I'm telling you, I do one class on top 10 things not to do as a chiropractor. And I talk about this one Gallup poll, or there's one poll that was done a few years ago that showed most trusted professions. And for chiropractic, this is like 2018 or something. For chiropractic, we are trusted about 41% of the population trusts us. I'm like, that's just tragic to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just a little bit over car salesmen for that. We're less than psychiatrists. I mean, it's just terrible. But we screw it ourselves. I'm like, there are too many people that don't trust us because of that kind of a thing.
I tell people a lot that chiropractic's reputation is earned, not made up.
Yeah.
I know we a lot of times as a profession like to play the victim, and a lot of times we like to point at the medical profession and the insurance companies and whoever, like everybody's the bad guy and they're just picking on chiropractors. And there might be some truth to that somewhere, but I think that a lot of the issues that are within the chiropractic profession have been earned. Like we've worked very hard to dump on ourselves.
And we've done a great job too.
Yeah, bang up job. Like nobody's harder on chiropractic than chiropractors. And it is our fault, because it's the crazy thing is it's not a result. I was talking to Jeff Langmaid the other day, and he was talking about, he said it's so stupid that, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he was like, it's so stupid that we live in a world where there's people that are wondering if chiropractic is safe and wondering if chiropractic is useful. He's like, when the highest paid people in the world who rely on their bodies for, performance, like professional athletes, Olympic athletes, all of them use chiropractors. And he's like, so like the average mom down the road is like wondering whether chiropractic is a good idea or not. And the medical doctor's wondering whether you should go or not. And he's like, it's so dumb that still happens in a world where the people who have the most to gain and the most to lose from their bodies are all going to chiropractors because they know it works. He's like, that paradox is crazy. And I thought that's a good point.
So many years ago, when our oldest son was like 5 years old, and he's 32 now. So it was a while ago. We lived in a house and we would go for walks, my wife and I and our son. And we'd go for a walk, and there was a house nearby that had a horse stables, and they had several horses there. So we would go by and we would stick a carrot through the fence, and the horses would come by and we'd feed them carrot. And then one day a guy came out, and we're like, uh-oh, we're busted. And the guy came over, and he's the foreman of this stable and stuff. And we started, and he goes, oh, no, you guys are fine. And he said, anytime you want to come by. So we started talking, and he asked me what I did. I told him I was a chiropractor. And he goes, oh, he said, well, let me tell you a story. He said, the horses that we board here, that we stable here, they're show horses. He says, in the show horse world, there's a low level show horse, a moderate level show horse, and a championship level show horse. And the dollar value of each is dramatically different. The value of a championship level show horse is way higher than a moderate level show horse. I'm like, okay. He said, we go to these shows and there's these two guys. And again, this is Arizona. There's two guys that were brothers, I think,
Yep.
just a couple of cowboys. And they would show up at these horse shows and they would adjust the horses
Yep.
before each show. He said they would charge. So this is what, 27 years ago? They were charging about $125 per horse. They would adjust the horse before the show. And I'm like, really? I said, I mean, do you notice a difference? And he goes, let me tell you. He said, we didn't change the feed. We didn't change the training. Nothing changed other than these horses getting adjusted. And we saw so many of these moderate level horses become championship level horses. And their value went through the roof. And the only thing that changed was that they were getting adjusted.
Yep.
I'm like, holy crap. I said, so these are horses. I said that you would think from a human perspective, right? When we talk about function and all that, it just blew my mind. I'm like, what a great, horses don't have the attitude.
That's actually true of racehorses too. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah.
But the race horses get adjusted also. It's and that was Jeff's point. It's like his point is like it's like, you know, our profession is not struggling because of results. We get incredible results.
Right.
Like we get such good results. Even bad chiropractors get incredible results. And it's something else. It is something else that is causing our problems. I would imagine if we look in a mirror, we'd probably see who the big issue is. So tell me this. I'm kind of just wondering, because we've been talking for a while, and I know you have a software. I know you have like trainings and stuff. And like, where does someone go to kind of start this process? Like they're listening to this, because a lot of times with podcasts, it's like it's impossible. I mean, I've done 400 and some podcasts. It's like it's impossible to like unpack things in a podcast episode, and someone has to just be interested in learning more, and then they have to be committed to kind of taking whatever that next step is. Like what is the next step, or one of the possible next steps, whether that's connecting with you, getting software, taking a class, like watching something free, reading something? Like what is the thing when someone listens to this and they say, I need to be better at this, like I need to step up my game? I would say you're probably a good person to consult for that, since you're the expert, not me. Don't come to me, because I don't know anything. Where do they start with that? Like, what's the next thing for them?
Yeah, so I do quite a bit of teaching. So before COVID, I was all over the country. I was traveling like close to 100,000 miles a year every year before COVID. And since COVID, I was able to shift much of that to online. So I have webinars that I do both live and recorded. And and my webinars are 12 hours long. So I do one webinar a month on the weekend. So 6 hours Saturday, 6 hours Sunday. It's a live webinar. And then I did something a couple of years ago where we're like, let's do them on a weeknight. I'm like, who's going to do 12 hours on a week? I'm not going to do that. Like, no, let's split up your 12 hours into 4 3-hour chunks.
Yeah.
And do them on pick a night. I'm like, I'll do that. I don't think anybody's going to show up though. So I split them up into 4 parts, 3 hours each, and I do them on Wednesday nights. That's 3 hours Wednesday nights. I do that 4 times a month. Every now and then I got to switch days, but it's usually Wednesday nights. And I was amazed at how many doctors like the Wednesdays better than the weekend, because it's easier to do that. So I have those. So I do 3 hours, 4 times a month, live webinars. I do the 1 weekend a month live webinar. I have the recorded version of both. These are all for CEU credits too. So if some states you have to do live online, not recorded, and other states not. So that's a good place to start. Learn the actual rules and the requirements before you go out and start buying software. Or I know it's too late for some; they've already bought software. Before you get too committed, learn the requirements. because what's going to happen is going to go, oh yeah, that makes total sense. But my software doesn't do that. What do I do? Well, you're going to need to talk to them about it, or find a software that does that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And that website for my schedule, I also speak at conventions. So, I mean, I was in West Virginia last weekend, and I'll be in the week after Thanksgiving, I'll be in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then Dallas, and I'm all over. So my website has a schedule of all the webinars and the live in-person seminars at our conventions that I do. And that website is gotdocumentation.com. So GOT, spelled G-O-T like tango, documentation.com. And then if you go to the dates page, it'll show you the schedule of the different webinars and the in-person seminars. For software, yes, I did design my own software a few years ago that took all this information and all these requirements and put it into a spot that we hit the requirements, but in much less time, with much less effort, and with much less cost, because we're able to use technology to do a lot of it for us. When we use these metrics the way we're required to use them, this is when the technology can actually calculate for us how each metric changed since the previous visit or the previous evaluation. And we can use those same metrics to determine, to calculate and document measurable treatment goals that are specific to each condition, which is another requirement that hardly anybody does. I use technology to do that for me. So that software is called Bulletproof. And I tell doctors, I would rather you do the webinar first and learn how to do this, because if you just buy the software without knowing what the hell I'm talking about, you're going to be like, wait a minute, this is not how I want to document. I don't care how you want to document. You need to document the right way. And then, but some will just ignore me. So the Bulletproof is part of a large company called Clinic Mind. And you could go to clinicmind.com and then click on software, and then you'll see Bulletproof. So Bulletproof could be used either as an EMR, electronic medical record, solely for documentation. And then you could use whatever you're using currently for your billing and scheduling and all that. Or if you want to use Bulletproof as a full EHR, which includes billing, scheduling, and all the other stuff, then we do have an integration with this Clinic Mind EHR, which is what I do. I actually use both, and Clinic Mind is cloud-based. Bulletproof is on your local computer. So I have full control over my records. So I document in Bulletproof, and I click 2 buttons, and boom, it uploads to my Clinic Mind account, and the billing goes out. I can put payments in. Insurance payments are automatically done, and their team takes care of all that for me. They do all the follow-up. So super easy to do that. So whichever works for somebody. But again, I do recommend, I said, learn the requirements first, and then start shopping around and seeing what's going to work for you. I had somebody from, I think, California emailed me the other day, and they saw me on another podcast interview. And they said, yeah, I want to be a supervisor or something for a student who, or is from one of the colleges, but they won't let me do it because my notes are handwritten. So I need to have computerized notes. So I'm interested in your program to do that. I'm like, oh, okay, before you do that, learn the system, learn the format first, and then you can decide if that's going to work for you.
Yeah, that's such an important principle in general. I think that we live in a world where people oftentimes jump to the nuts and bolts without understanding. I do that with I told you about my online classes and stuff that I do for business and marketing. And there's these sections, and I have this section of information that says the foundation. And I typically will tell people, especially when they're new, I tell them, go through that stuff. Like, this stuff is, and it's probably not going to be the stuff you joined for. Like you joined for the SEO information or the website information or the social media, the networking stuff, like the new patient stuff. Like, that's what you joined for. But the problem is, if you just go running around doing that and you have no idea why you're doing what you're doing, it's very inefficient. It's like fishing, and I'm not a fisherman. My brother's the hunter gatherer of the family, and I am not a fisherman. But I do know that if you're trying to catch swordfish, it does change where you go, when you go. the equipment you use, the bait you use, the time, like all this stuff changes versus if you're
Right.
going to get catfish or bass or something like that. And so just going out to the store and buying whatever reel and whatever thing and whatever boat and whatever, just because it's cheapest, it's available, it's the first thing you see, and then running out and saying, I'm going to do something specific with it, that's that's a terrible way
Right.
to go about it. And that's a lot of people do that. And it is putting the cart before the horse. And I'm always a big advocate of understand what you're doing before you try to do it. Cause
Yeah. It's
it
my
makes,
anti-sales pitch.
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
I mean, I'm happy to, get the software, but I really want you to understand this process first.
yeah.
And then you got to decide if this is going to work for you or not. And then you could do that, because I see all these records from chiropractors and they're using these software programs that they're not even close. And they
Yeah.
think that, well, I'm using software, I should be good. I'm like, no, they don't know what we're talking about. So
I have that
that's an
issue
issue.
with the SEO, like the fully managed SEO that I do. I actually talk more people out of it than into it. Because they come to me and I'm like, you're not, it's not right for you. Like this is something that there, it's a specific person that this really is going to work well for, and it's not you. And I talk people out of it all the time, which is crazy because it costs me money. But I just I don't want someone unhappy with me because we were on the wrong page, and I knew out of the gate that we were on the wrong page, and
Mhm.
I'm not a fan of that.
Yep, I agree.
Cool, man. Anything else you want to say before we finish up?
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I've enjoyed it as much as I crapped on you right out of the gate. It's been a
I'm
great
used to it.
conversation.
It's okay. It's
All
okay.
right, man. Hey, we'll talk again later. Okay.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
Jerry.
Thanks, Greg.